So there's cause and effect. When you take an action, there's bound to be a reaction. Sometimes it's for the better, but other times it has the potential to send everything crashing down. And this time, Argentina is paying a very big price for moving away from Beijing. In a stunning report, China has stopped a currency swap line agreement with Argentina worth 6.5 billion US dollars. And this freeze remains in effect until Javier Milei, the new Argentine president, makes concrete moves to repair relations. There has to be a clear intention to engage with China's economy. Now, a currency swap line is very simple. It is an exchange agreement where two countries swap currencies with each other. In this case, Argentina swaps their pesos for the Chinese yuan, and after a set period of time, the yuan will be swapped back for the Argentine pesos. In most cases, $6.5 billion worth isn't really a huge amount. Japan's own swap line with China is $30 billion strong. Argentina's currency swap facility is just a small fraction of that. But understand the insane situation Argentina is in. The country has a massive currency crisis and inflation that's simply out of control. A week ago, Argentina devalued their national currency, the Argentine peso, by 54%. And this devaluation is expected to continue at 2% per month. This is in addition to the existing 140% inflation rate that is plaguing the economy. In other words, Milei shock therapy is crashing the currency against the dollar, and this severe currency crisis has enormous consequences for their economy. Imports will become more expensive, people's buying power will evaporate, and any paper wealth will collapse as well into thin air, right? And because of Milei's desire to break away from China and move closer to the West, he has unleashed yet another disaster on the Argentine peso. He previously mentioned how Argentina wouldn't work with communist countries. Milei's top diplomat also rejected the invitation to join the BRICS bloc. This is obviously a slap in the face to China, and now things are starting to backfire. The road to economic recovery is now compromised. Now that China's swap line is frozen, this plunges Argentina into a deeper crisis that will impact their imports and by extension their exports as well. Over the last 12 months, the currency has collapsed by 78% against the dollar. The latest drop comes as a result of the big devaluation introduced by Milei. And this is why Argentina's inflation rate has hit 160% in November this month. In Milei's campaign, he promised that taxes wouldn't be raised and that inflation would eventually come down. To accomplish this, he has sold a record amount of Argentine bonds that are denominated in the local currency, the peso. Almost 3 trillion pesos was sold, and this money will be used to repurchase treasury debt held by the central bank. Now, this isn't a long-term solution, guys. It's a band-aid to control inflation in the immediate term. By selling bonds, Milei is removing currency from the economy. When you drain liquidity away, there's less money circulating around, and that should, by effect, drive down inflation. Because the money is used to buy back debt held by the central bank, it transfers the debt to the Argentine treasury back to the government. And this money doesn't enter the real economy. The plan is to stop the overflow of pesos. However, this is just kicking the can down the road for a little while longer. There are two flaws with this plan. Firstly, the majority of bonds sold were 27-day notes at a monthly interest rate of 8.7%. This is a monthly rate and not an annual rate. This means within 27 days, investors will get back their principal amount plus a yield of 8.6%. This increases the money supply once again. And where will this amount of pesos come from? Well, it will come from the central bank once again through money printing. It's simply kicking the can down the road. The demand for the peso bonds was high and the sale was oversubscribed. Inflation is so high that people in Argentina would rather lose less by buying these bonds than lose everything by staying in cash. In fact, the demand for Argentine dollar bonds is starting to rise again. We can see this continued rise in the value of Argentina's dollar-denominated debt. Some would say it's because the country's economy looks bright, but I would argue that it's because the peso will still continue to crash. So holding dollars is becoming even more attractive than before. And thanks to China stopping the swap line, the peso is now worth less locally. Remember what a currency truly is. They are simply colorful pieces of paper that you can swap for goods and services. You can swap them for bread, milk, a computer, and a car. The more products you can access, the more valuable your currency is. The US dollar is the most useful currency today because everything is still priced in dollars. The majority of oil, food, and exports are priced in the reserve currency. As an emerging market, Argentina needs a ton of dollars to function in the global economy. However, their dollar reserves have been dwindling month after month. It went from $34 billion in January this year down to only $17 billion in November. For a country of 46 million people, this is a very small amount of money. They have a big dollar shortage, which is causing the peso to collapse in value. The fewer dollars they have, the more they have to print pesos to buy back the reserve currency. And this kickstarts an endless cycle of devaluation where their local currency keeps dropping further and further. This is where China's yuan swap line comes into play. To survive, Argentina had been using China's swap line quite aggressively. In total, they could access up to $18 billion worth of Chinese yuan. This is a lifeline that allows Milei to import a ton of stuff from China. Since 2019, Argentina has been running a bigger trade deficit with China year after year, hitting almost $10 billion in 2022. Argentina has been buying more stuff from China than what they are selling to Beijing. So where's this money coming from? Well, it's coming from the yuan swap line that China gave them. Back in May this year, the country's foreign reserves were dominated by the Chinese currency. $19 billion or half of their currency reserves were denominated in yuan, which shows you the tremendous reliance they have on the swap line. Now, if that were to disappear, Argentina would lose a big avenue to import vital goods to the country because China is the world's factory. Having the Chinese yuan allows you to access Beijing's finished goods. It's just as good as the dollar, especially if you need to bring in raw materials. Argentina produces a lot of commodities, especially wheat and soybeans, but they still need imports to run their industries and power their economy. Over the past 5 years, China's exports to Argentina have been growing. It went from under $500 million to $1.3 billion in 2022. That's almost a threefold increase thanks to the swap lines. This is what's keeping Argentina's economy afloat. Breaking down the components of the imports, most of them are raw materials that the Argentine economy needs. This includes electrical machinery, boilers, and organic chemicals, goods that Argentina themselves can't produce. With access to the swap facility, Argentina doesn't need to sell their local currency on the open markets to scramble for more US dollars. They can simply swap it with China for yuan to access Chinese goods. In other words, this swap line is beneficial to both countries. Beijing gets to sell more stuff to Argentina while Milei gets to prevent a further collapse of the peso. This helps prevent higher inflation. And here's where things get really interesting. In addition to imports, Argentina also relies on the Chinese currency to pay back its existing debt obligations. The country owes the IMF $44 billion in a loan program which they eventually need to pay back. And because of the acute scarcity of dollars, they use the Chinese yuan to repay their IMF loan instead of USD. China was helping to subsidize their borrowing as well. Losing the yuan swap line from China will deal a big blow to Argentina. It will force them to make even more radical changes. These will be changes both economic and political. The path to recovery for Argentina has now become much more difficult, and what Milei has to do going forward is going to be very shocking. Now, one of Milei's big plans is to privatize the Argentine economy. He vows to sell off many state-owned companies to the private sector. The sale will include the national airline Aerolíneas as well as their national oil company, YPF. This is where things get really murky. Because Argentina has an acute shortage of dollars, these companies can't fund their operations without the government going to further debt. In other words, the Argentine government is too broke to operate their own state-owned companies. On the one hand, this is a good thing. Private companies can use their balance sheet or dollar reserves to run key sectors in the economy. This helps to keep the lights on and daily life gets to continue more or less without making inflation worse. That is key. In fact, privatization can help increase the efficiency of these companies and downsize government workers, which is exactly what Milei wants to do. As part of this campaign promise, Milei plans to lay off recently hired government workers and reduce the number of federal ministries from 18 down to only 9. That's a 50% reduction in government agencies. By doing this, he wants to cut away unproductive parts of the economy and reduce spending to shrink the budget deficit down. Privatization is one avenue that can accomplish that. If we analyze Argentina's railway network, which is state-owned, there is a glaring problem here. There are just too many employees on the government payroll. Compared to America's Amtrak, which is a for-profit company, the Argentine railway has 7 times more employees with respect to their railway track length. But Argentina is simply employing too many workers to run the show. Privatization aims to cut away this excess. However, there's also a thin red line that Argentina needs to tread carefully, especially when it comes to their national oil company. The YPF, which is Argentina's oil company, has been trading 20% below its 2012 level. That was when the country nationalized the company, and this shows just how much the company has stagnated. If you were an investor and you bought YPF, you just wasted 10 years going nowhere. But now that Milei wants to privatize the sector, YPF shares have rallied by incredible 40% since he won the elections. Maybe Exxon or maybe Chevron might take a stake in the company and improve the operations. However, privatization can turn into exploitation if a country isn't careful enough. It can lead to companies cornering all of the country's profits, leaving little for the local population. To prevent this, you need a strong government to make it happen, and it seems that people are having doubts. There are protests on the streets of Argentina regarding this deregulation. People are afraid that jobs could vanish and that the country could get even poorer with all the profits flowing to private companies. If you throw in the frozen Yuan swap line, Milei probably has no choice but to go down this route. He'll be threading a needle trying to balance between recovery and disaster. There's also going to be a political reality. Now that the Yuan facility is gone, Milei probably has to double down with the Americans. Over the next few months and even years, we will likely see Argentina drift closer and even closer to the United States. America is already offering to support Milei in talks with the IMF and developing their lithium mining sector as well. Because Argentina's end goal is to dollarize their economy, it kind of makes sense that Biden is moving to support the Argentine economy. If the Argentine economy grows, they'll be using more US dollars within the country, and that drives even more demand for the reserve currency. But what Milei likely wants is to get a dollar swap line with the US. This allows Argentina to directly swap pesos for US dollars to solve their import problems. However, that's easier said than done. But getting a swap line with the Federal Reserve isn't easy. Very few countries have them. It's mainly the G7 nations like the UK and Canada. Countries with big economic ties to the US like Brazil and South Korea also have swap lines with America. So we can expect Milei to bend over backwards to try to get this facility. Without China's swap line, the desperation is only going to grow. And that's why in 2024, we can kiss goodbye to Argentina joining the BRICS. It simply won't happen now. I think the split in the world order is getting more and more obvious. The West and its financial system, they are on one side. China and BRICS with their commodities and trade, they are on the other side. The smarter choice is to work with both economic blocs. There's no need to choose, but Milei has made his choice and now China has taken action. If we compare both the GDPs for the BRICS versus the G7, we can see that the G7 still wins on a nominal basis, $46 trillion versus 31 trillion. But that's just a superficial measure. In terms of purchasing power parity, China has already exceeded the US. Many of the BRICS nations, such as India and China, they all have a middle class that's going to explode over the next few decades. And this means consumption power will skyrocket even higher. So Milei's choice to exit BRICS for the West might be rather short-sighted. Cutting relations with China will have consequences. The swap line suspension might be the start of all these benefits ending. For example, Beijing could always import more soybeans from Brazil and even the US instead of Argentina. They are already the biggest buyers there with over 60% market shares in either country. If China does a boycott, that might drive down Argentina's revenues at a time where Milei needs to increase his exports to the world. They won't get the best possible selling price. Will Milei really save Argentina? I don't know, right? But the challenge is now harder than ever before. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Can Argentina rebuild their economy? And will the US step in with their own dollar swap line? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.